The dirt pressed cold and damp against her cheek, and for hours she had barely moved, the weight of her rifle pinning into her ribs as if it had fused with her body. The shallow trench she lay in was no more than a scar in the earth, a jagged line dug hastily when the barrage began at dawn. Now, with the sun burning high and the air heavy with smoke, she had become a part of that scar, silent, tense, waiting. Her name was Corporal Lena Dravic, but on this battlefield, names hardly mattered anymore. Only breath, heartbeat, and the stubborn refusal to let fear pull the trigger too soon. The enemy had her pinned down since morning, rifles cracking from somewhere across the ruined field, every movement punished by a spray of dirt where a bullet struck. She had stopped trying to crawl for a better angle, she had stopped even lifting her head above the earth. The last time she did, her helmet had been rattled by a grazing shot that left her ears ringing. Since then she only listened, the whistle of incoming shells in the far distance, the groans of the dying somewhere behind her, and the steady, merciless silence of the men hunting her from across the no-man's land. The hours stretched into something beyond time. Hunger gnawed, thirst scraped her throat raw, but it was the waiting that killed her most. She had been trained for combat but not for this, being nailed down like prey beneath an invisible hunter. Every muscle in her body begged her to move, to run, to break free of this suffocating trench, but instinct screamed louder, stay alive. Stay small. Stay still. The enemy wanted her to panic, to shift even an inch, to give them the shot they were waiting for. So she lay there, every breath shallow, her fingers clenched around her rifle, her cheek resting against the dirt, eyes fixed on the shattered husk of a farmhouse that loomed in the distance. That was where the shots came from. She couldn't see them, couldn't mark a silhouette or a flash of light, but she knew. A sniper. Patient as a vulture. He had her in his sight all day, and she had nothing but the hope that dusk would change the balance. Behind her, the sounds of battle came in fragments, carried on the wind. Sporadic gunfire. The distant boom of artillery. Somewhere, the cries of a wounded man begging for water until his voice was swallowed by silence. Her squad had scattered in the morning assault, driven into the dirt by withering fire. She didn't know if any of them were alive. The radio operator had been the first to go, his body collapsing like a puppet with strings cut, and with him went their only line to command. For Lena, the battlefield had shrunk to this trench, this patch of earth where she breathed shallow and tried not to die. She imagined the sniper across the field, calm, steady, waiting for her head to lift again. Did he eat during this? Did he drink? Did he smile knowing he had trapped her in his invisible cage? She imagined his eye pressed to the scope, the crosshairs resting on the spot where her helmet lay buried in dirt, and her skin crawled. He was out there. Watching. Always watching. The sun crawled overhead, baking the earth, turning the trench into a furnace. Sweat stung her eyes, ran down her neck, soaked her uniform until it clung to her skin. Flies gathered on the corpses half buried near the trench, their buzzing louder than the shells now. A broken helmet lay beside her, cracked clean through, still carrying strands of hair inside. She forced herself not to look at it for long. She had looked too long at too many things already today. Her heartbeat had slowed into a rhythm that no longer felt her own, just a dull thud reminding her that she was still here, though part of her wished she wasn't. Waiting like this, trapped under an enemy's gaze, was its own kind of death. The war manuals had never written about it, but every soldier learned sooner or later. The ones who survived weren't the fastest or strongest, but the ones who could endure the weight of waiting, who could let fear gnaw at them without breaking. By midday, her mind began to slip in strange directions. She thought of the river by her village, where she used to fish with her father as a child. She thought of the way the reeds swayed in the current, the smell of wet grass, the laughter when they caught nothing but stayed anyway because it was summer and the world was wide. That river felt like another life, a place that couldn't exist anymore. Here in the trench, the only river was of blood drying in the dirt, of sweat rolling down her temple, of time itself dripping slow and cruel. She caught herself whispering once, a prayer she didn't know she still remembered, but she cut herself off quickly. Sound carried. Even breath could betray. The sniper wanted a mistake. He wanted the tremble of movement, the curve of her head rising above the trench. She would not give it. The hours thickened. Shadows stretched. Her body stiffened so much she could barely feel her legs. Every so often, she adjusted her grip on the rifle, careful, deliberate, one finger at a time, so slow it was almost invisible. She rehearsed the motion in her mind, the rise, the aim, the fire. One shot. That was all she could risk. If she missed, she would be dead before she chambered another. She told herself she would not shoot until the light bent low, until dusk blurred the sniper's eye and made him less than a ghost. All day she held that thought like a stone in her hand. Just last until dusk. Last until the light changes. Last until the balance shifts. She counted the artillery strikes far away, using them to mark the hours. She counted her breaths, steady as she could manage. She counted the small sounds around her, the creak of wood as the farmhouse in the distance settled in the heat, the whisper of grass moved by wind, the faint rattle of cartridges when she shifted her belt. All of it she turned into rhythm, into order, into something she could hold. Anything to keep her from unraveling. Once, a crow landed on the trench's edge, its black eyes peering down at her with something like curiosity. She froze, afraid even to blink, but it cawed and took off again, flapping toward the sky that was beginning to burn with late light. She envied it, the freedom of wings, the simple escape from this endless stare down. But she had no wings. Only a rifle. Only patience. When the sun finally began its descent, the world seemed to breathe with her. The heat softened, the colors of the battlefield shifted into amber and long shadows. Her pulse quickened. The sniper would adjust his scope now, the light changing, the angle shifting. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment when dusk made ghosts of even the most patient hunters. Slowly, she pressed her cheek harder into the dirt, lifted her eyes just enough to see over the lip of the trench. There, the farmhouse, its windows black holes, its walls scarred with bullet marks. Somewhere inside he was watching. Somewhere inside he was waiting. She inhaled, deep and steady, and for the first time all day she let herself imagine victory. One shot. One chance. All the waiting had been for this. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the battlefield in bruised oranges and heavy purples, as if the land itself were wounded and gasping. The trench felt tighter now, its walls closing in, the shadows long enough to conceal but not yet deep enough to comfort. Lena shifted her weight with agonizing slowness, every muscle protesting after a day of stillness. Her legs prickled with numbness, but she ignored it. Pain was a distraction. The sniper was her reality. He was still out there, beyond the farmhouse's hollow eyes, somewhere in the dark corners where light could not quite reach. She knew he was adjusting, recalibrating just as she was. The rules had changed with the sun's descent. Now it was no longer endurance that mattered. It was nerve, precision, timing. She inched her rifle upward, the metal warm from the long hours pressed against her body. The scope's edge just barely caught the fading light, its glass a fragile as she had to trust. She dared to lift her head another inch, her breath freezing in her throat. Her heart kicked against her ribs, loud enough she was certain he could hear it from across the field. She swept the scope slowly across the farmhouse. Broken shutters dangled. The roof had collapsed inward, jagged timbers crossing like bones. Empty windows stared back, hollow and endless. Nothing moved. No flash, no glint, no shifting shadow to betray him. He was still there. She felt it like the weight of a gaze boring into her skull. He had not left. He was waiting for this exact moment, when desperation would finally force her up. The silence pressed so hard against her ears she thought she would scream. Her finger brushed the trigger, not yet pulling but resting as if to whisper to it, soon. She shifted her position by inches, finding a crack between dirt clods that let her angle better toward the farmhouse. Still nothing. Dusk deepened, painting everything in shades of ash and blood. Her eyes strained against it, searching for the smallest detail, the slightest unnatural line. Then there, barely perceptible. A flicker. Not movement exactly, but the way light caught on something it should not. Metal, she thought. Scope glass, catching the last smear of sun before it fell behind the horizon. Her pulse surged. She had him. Or maybe he wanted her to think that. A trap within a trap. She forced herself to breathe, deep, controlled, steadying her hands. This was not about rage, not about survival even. It was about control of one heartbeat, one squeeze of a finger, one perfect stillness after a day of endless tension. She counted in her head. 1, 2, 3. On 4 she exhaled and squeezed. The rifle cracked, thunder splitting the dusk, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. Dirt sprayed near the farmhouse as the round punched into wood. For one breathless second she thought she had missed, thought she had wasted the only shot she could take. But then the silence broke. A sound carried across the field, faint but unmistakable. A cry. Low, short, cut off quickly but human. She had hit something. Maybe not a kill but a wound. Her chest seized with savage relief, the kind that tasted almost like victory. But it was not over. The farmhouse answered. A bullet ripped into the trench wall inches from her face, spraying dirt across her cheek. He was still alive. Still dangerous. She ducked low, pressing herself flat, pulse racing like thunder in her skull. The sniper was hurt but not out. And now he was angry. She could feel it in the ferocity of that answering shot, closer than any before. He had been patient all day, but Dusk had shifted something in both of them. The duel was no longer about waiting. It was about finishing. She wiped the dirt from her face with the back of her glove, jaw clenched, determination hardening like steel. If he wanted to end this now, so did she. The minutes dragged, stretched thin by fear and adrenaline. The light dimmed further, and the farmhouse became little more than a shadow among shadows. She strained her eyes until they ached, searching for any hint of movement. He would have to adjust his position now, wounded as he was. That was her chance. She slid her rifle into a new angle, using the trench wall to mask her silhouette. She imagined where he might crawl inside that broken husk of a building, where he might set his rifle to counter her. She whispered calculations in her head, angles and lines, guessing his choices the way a chess player guessed the unseen board. She would only get one more chance. And so would he. Suddenly a flash, brief, sharp, unmistakable. Muzzle flare. The shot screamed across the field, tearing into the dirt a hand's breadth from her arm. Too close. Too damn close. She reacted without thought, her rifle snapping upward, sighting on the place where that flare had burned for a heartbeat. She fired. The rifle's crack split the dusk again, louder this time, like the world itself demanded an ending. The shot slammed through wood and stone. For a second there was silence. Then a collapse. Something heavy falling inside the farmhouse. Then nothing. No return shot. No flicker. No cry. Her chest heaved, each breath like a knife dragged through her lungs. She kept her rifle trained on that shadowed ruin, unwilling to believe it could be over. The silence stretched. 1 minute. 2. The field lay still, the farmhouse broken and mute. She dared to lift her head higher, straining to catch any sign of life. Nothing. The sniper was down. She could feel it in the sudden emptiness across the field, as if a weight that had pressed on her all day had lifted at last. She exhaled, a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh, and let her body sag against the trench wall. Her arms trembled violently, unable to hold steady any longer. The waiting was done. The duel was over. And she was still alive. But victory had no sweetness here. The field still reeked of blood and smoke. The air still hummed with distant artillery. And somewhere behind her, bodies still lay where they had fallen, unburied, unremembered. She had survived, but the war had not ended with a single bullet. It had only shifted. She knew, even as she pressed her forehead against the dirt in exhausted relief, that night would bring new dangers. Patrols. Counterattacks. The enemy would not rest. And she would not have long before she had to move again. Survival in war was never permanent. It was only borrowed time. She forced herself upright, her muscles screaming in protest, her limbs sluggish after so many hours of stillness. The trench was narrow, filled with debris and the stench of death. She checked her rifle, reloaded, hands trembling but steady enough. She could not stay here. The sniper had anchored her in this grave all day, but now she was free, and freedom meant movement. Somewhere beyond this battlefield, her unit might still be alive. Somewhere beyond, orders waited. A war larger than her duel lay raging, and she could not afford to be late to it. She climbed carefully from the trench, the earth soft and treacherous beneath her boots, and for the first time since dawn, she stood in the open air. The sky above was bruised with twilight, the first stars glinting like the eyes of gods who cared nothing for human blood. She inhaled deep, filling her lungs with the acrid night, and began to walk toward the ruins. The ground outside the trench felt unreal beneath her boots, as if she were stepping onto another planet after being buried alive for an eternity. The air was heavier here, colder now that the sun had surrendered and twilight ruled the battlefield. Smoke drifted lazily in the distance, its tendrils catching the dim light like ghosts refusing to leave. Each step Lena took was measured, careful, as though even the earth itself might betray her with a crack or crunch loud enough to summon bullets. From the shadows. Her rifle was steady against her shoulder, eyes sweeping the dark horizon, nerves wired so tightly she felt every beat of her heart echo in her fingertips. The farmhouse loomed ahead, broken, skeletal, its jagged frame cutting black shapes against the last smear of color in the west. Somewhere inside, the sniper who had owned her life all day now lay silent. But silence could lie. Silence could be bait. She crouched low as she neared, keeping to the tall grass, her silhouette broken and shifting. The world had narrowed to the ruined structure, every sense tuned to it. She smelled the charred wood, felt the shift of cooling wind against her skin, heard the groan of broken boards settling. Each sound teased her nerves like the brush of a blade. Her boots pressed carefully into the soil, avoiding rocks, avoiding anything that would betray her with sound. The farmhouse was close now, so close she could see the holes chewed into its walls, the splinters hanging like teeth from shattered frames. She paused, crouched in the dirt, listening. Nothing. Only the faraway drum of artillery, distant enough to be another world. She inhaled, exhaled, and moved. The doorway was nothing more than a ragged mouth of splintered wood. She pressed her back to the wall, her breath shallow, then swung her rifle around barrel first and entered in a low crouch. The air inside was cooler, damp, thick with the stink of mildew and blood. Shadows ruled here, clinging to corners where the last threads of dusk could not reach. She moved one step at a time, rifle sweeping, boots quiet. The floor creaked under her weight and she froze, waiting, heart thundering, sweat slick on her neck. No answer. No movement. Only the silence of abandonment. But silence had teeth, she reminded herself, and she would not be fooled. She advanced deeper into the ruin. The ceiling sagged above, beams fractured, patches of sky peeking through. Dust drifted in thin rays of fading light. Broken furniture lay scattered, overturned as though someone had lived here once and fled in panic. The smell of iron grew stronger the further she went, sharp, metallic, undeniable. Blood. She tracked it with her eyes, a dark trail across warped floorboards. Her pulse surged. Her bullet had found its mark after all. She followed the trail with steady steps, rifle raised, every nerve screaming at her that each second could be her last. The trail led to the far corner of the farmhouse, where rubble had collapsed inward to form a half-shelter, half-tomb. She swept her rifle toward it and froze. He was there. The sniper. A man crumpled against the jagged boards, his body twisted awkwardly, one arm limp, the other clutching his chest where blood had soaked his uniform black. His rifle lay beside him, its scope shattered by her second shot, the glass spiderwebbed and useless. His face was pale in the dim light, lined with exhaustion, eyes wide and wild but still alive. He was young. Younger than she expected. Barely older than a boy, really. His lips trembled as if to form words, but nothing came, only a wet cough that sprayed blood down his chin. Lena's rifle did not waver. She held it steady, barrel aimed between his eyes, her own breath sharp and controlled. One squeeze and it would be finished. One squeeze and the hunter who had caged her all day would vanish forever. But she hesitated. In the silence of that ruined farmhouse, she saw not a monster, not a phantom, but a boy with fear in his eyes, the same fear that had gnawed at her all day. He was human, fragile, dying. The realization hit her harder than any bullet. They had both been prey to the same war, pawns forced to play predator and hunted alike. She clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to pull the trigger, fighting the urge to look away. Her arms trembled not from fear now, but from the weight of choice. Mercy was a dangerous thing on a battlefield. Mercy could mean her death. And yet, staring at him, she felt it coil inside her chest, hot and relentless. The sniper coughed again, this time managing to rasp a single word in a language foreign to her ears. She didn't understand it, but the tone was clear. Plea, surrender, the raw sound of a man facing his end. She shifted her stance, her rifle lowering a fraction, and hated herself for it. She wanted to hate him, to see him as the faceless threat who had pinned her in the dirt all day. But now, in this ruin, he was only a boy who would never see another dawn. His breaths came shallow, rattling. He would die here with or without her bullet. The war would take him regardless. Her finger eased from the trigger, and she exhaled a shudder she hadn't realized she was holding. She stepped closer, cautious, her rifle still ready. His eyes followed her, wide, fever-bright, and she saw recognition in them, not of her face but of her role. She was his executioner and his mercy. He lifted a trembling hand, not toward his weapon but toward a small pouch at his belt. For a heartbeat she thought it a trick, her muscles tensing to fire, but then she saw the object he pulled free. A photograph. Small, bent, stained with his blood. He held it out to her with fingers that shook violently. Lena's heart tightened. Against every instinct, she reached forward and took it, her rifle never fully leaving his body. The photo was simple. A young woman, smiling, holding a child. His family. The sniper coughed again, eyes flickering with pain but never leaving hers. She swallowed hard, the photo trembling in her grip. For a long moment, the farmhouse was timeless, war suspended, only two soldiers breathing in the dark. She tucked the photo back into his limp hand, closing his fingers around it. His lips twitched with what might have been thanks, or maybe only the last flicker of strength. His chest rose and fell, shallow, ragged. She stepped back, raising her rifle again, torn between duty and something she could not name. In the end she did not fire. She lowered the barrel, turned away and left him with his photograph, his silence, his death. The war would claim him soon enough. She would not be the one to take what little humanity he had left. Outside, the night had fully taken the battlefield. The stars blinked sharp and cold above, the kind of beauty that felt obscene over ground soaked in blood. Lena moved quickly now, her steps purposeful, each stride carrying her further from the farmhouse. Her chest felt heavy as though she had swallowed stones. The image of his eyes lingered, the weight of that photograph burning in her thoughts. She had survived, yes. But survival was never clean. It came with ghosts, and tonight she had collected another. The battlefield was quiet in the way only night could bring. Quiet but never safe. She tightened her grip on her rifle and scanned the horizon. Somewhere out there, other snipers still waited. Other trenches still bled. The war did not end because she spared one boy. The war did not care for mercy. And yet, as she moved back into the shifting shadows, she carried with her something heavier than her rifle. The knowledge that even here, even in the jaws of hell, she had chosen not to kill when killing was all the world demanded. The night swallowed her as soon as she left the ruined farmhouse behind, the shadows wrapping around her like a cloak, both protective and suffocating. Lena moved with measured urgency, boots pressing softly into the broken earth, rifle steady in her hands. The battlefield was a graveyard of silence now, broken only by distant thunder where artillery still rumbled. Against the horizon, each boom rolled across the land like the voice of some merciless god, reminding her that the war stretched far beyond her narrow duel. The sky was wide and cold, a sheet of stars glaring down as though to judge the blood below. She kept her head low, shoulders tight, senses sharpened to every whisper of wind, every rustle of grass, every creak of wood from abandoned structures scattered across the desolation. Her body ached from the long day spent pinned in the trench. Each step was agony, her legs sluggish, her back stiff, but she pushed forward. Pain was irrelevant. Survival was everything. She knew that staying still was death, movement was life. The farmhouse behind her felt like a wound she had just sewn shut, left raw, unfinished but no longer bleeding. Ahead lay only uncertainty and perhaps her squad, if any of them had lived. She didn't let herself hope too much. Hope was another kind of bullet, one that pierced deeper than steel. Still, the thought of hearing another human voice, of not being alone in this wasteland, kept her moving. She passed the carcass of a burned-out truck, its tires melted to black puddles, its metal twisted into grotesque shapes. The smell of fuel still clung to it, sharp in her nose. She crouched there, scanning the horizon. In the distance, faint shapes moved, too far to tell if friend or foe. She stayed low until they vanished into the folds of night, her breath slow, eyes unblinking. The war had turned the land into a theater of shadows, where anything that moved could be death. She rose only when silence reclaimed the air and then kept moving. The field stretched wide, broken by the bones of fences and the husks of once living trees. She followed the lay of the land, instinct guiding her toward the shallow valley where her squad had been last seen before the morning ambush scattered them. Each step took her deeper into darkness. The grass brushed against her legs, wet with dew that smelled faintly of rot, as if even nature had been corrupted by the day's slaughter. The night had its own weight, pressing on her chest, urging her to collapse, but she clenched her jaw and pressed on. Hours seemed to fold together. Time was fluid on the battlefield, measured not by clocks but by breaths, by the distance between danger and cover. She thought of the sniper boy again, his pale face, his trembling hand clutching the photo. She shook the memory away, forcing her eyes back to the dark terrain. Distraction was a weapon that killed just as surely as bullets. Still, the image refused to leave her. In his face she had seen a reflection of herself, another soldier who hadn't asked for this, bound to the war all the same. She wondered how many others lay across this land, staring at the sky with the same fear in their eyes, enemies only because the world demanded it. The thought was poison, and yet it lingered. Then she heard it. A sound not made by wind or nature. Low, guttural, the unmistakable groan of pain. She froze, crouched low, rifle raised. Her eyes swept the grass ahead until she saw it. Movement, faint, the outline of a body sprawled near the edge of a shallow ditch. Her pulse surged, torn between dread and a flicker of hope. She moved closer, keeping low until the figure took shape. A soldier, his uniform torn, his leg twisted beneath him. He stirred weakly, his head turning toward her, eyes glinting faintly in the starlight. Recognition hit her like a wave. "Sergeant Koval?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. His eyes widened faintly. Dravik? His voice was cracked, ragged with exhaustion. Relief swelled in her chest so sharply it almost hurt. A living voice, a name that tethered her back to something human. She slid down beside him, scanning his injuries quickly. His leg was shattered, blood soaking through the cloth, the bone likely broken. He wouldn't be walking. His rifle lay a few feet away, empty, abandoned. She reached for her canteen and pressed it to his lips, watching him drink with desperate gulps before coughing. They scattered us, he rasped. Ambush, half the squad gone. I know, she said softly. Her voice felt strange after so many hours of silence, almost foreign. I was pinned all day. Sniper. I couldn't move. His gaze sharpened with faint surprise, then softened into something like grim pride. But you're still alive. So are you. He gave a bitter laugh that broke into a cough. Barely. His hand gripped hers suddenly, strength surprising despite his condition. Don't stop, Lena. Whatever happens, don't stop. You hear me? She nodded, throat tight. She wanted to promise him survival, to tell him they would both walk out, but the truth weighed heavier. He wasn't going to make it far, and they both knew it. Still, she refused to let the war steal this moment of connection. She stayed beside him for a long breath, the night pressing around them, and then shifted her focus. She couldn't carry him, not with her strength spent and enemies still prowling. But she could give him a chance. She dragged his rifle closer, reloading it with trembling hands and pressed it into his grip. If they come, you fight, she told him firmly. His lips curved in a weary smile. You sound like me. You taught me, she said. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy but not empty. Then distant voices cut through the night. She stiffened instantly, rifle rising. The voices were faint, scattered, speaking in low tones. Not her language. Enemy patrol. Her stomach clenched. They were sweeping the battlefield, finishing what the day's slaughter had begun. She met Koval's eyes, and in that glance they both understood. He squeezed her hand once hard, then released it. Go, he whispered. Find the others. I'll keep them busy. No. Go. His voice cracked sharp, the last of his strength pouring into the command. Her chest burned with refusal, but instinct and training pulled her legs into motion. She slipped into the tall grass, low and silent, heart pounding. Behind her, she heard him shift, heard the click of his rifle as he prepared himself. The voices drew closer, boots crunching against the earth. She crawled forward, every muscle taut, until she was far enough that the grass swallowed her completely. She turned once, just enough to see the faint flicker of muzzle flashes in the dark. Koval's rifle barking. Shouts answering in a language she didn't know. Then silence. She pressed her forehead into the dirt, eyes shut tight, forcing back the wave of grief. There was no time to mourn. His sacrifice had bought her minutes, nothing more, and she would waste none of them. She rose carefully, legs trembling, and kept moving into the night, her breath ragged but steady. Each step was heavier than the last, but she carried his command with her like a shield. Don't stop. Whatever happens, don't stop. The land ahead sloped downward, and in the distance she saw faint glimmers, light. Not the flicker of fire, but the controlled glow of lanterns. Her chest tightened with hope. It could be survivors. It could be her unit. Or it could be another trap. Either way, it was direction. And direction was life. She adjusted her rifle, squared her shoulders, and began the slow, cautious descent, the night wrapping tighter around her like a shroud, each step pulling her deeper into whatever awaited below. The silence that followed her last kill was unnatural, almost suffocating, like the battlefield itself had paused to witness what would come next. Smoke coiled upward from the shattered remains of vehicles and smoldering barricades, drifting into a bruised evening sky. Marin pressed her back against a wall of fractured stone, her breathing slow, shallow, but steady. Her muscles trembled with exhaustion, yet the flame in her chest refused to dim. Every movement she made now was a measured gamble. Each second a wager that she could last until the sun's descent into darkness gave her another cloak to hide within. She glanced at the horizon. The orange glow of dusk crept downward, bleeding into the ash-colored clouds above. Time was running thin and she knew it. Ammunition had become her heartbeat, ticking down with merciless precision. 6 rounds in her rifle. 2 in her sidearm. And one she had deliberately saved, tucked like a secret into the chamber. Insurance for when escape became impossible. She didn't want to think about using it on herself, but the thought lingered like a shadow at the back of her mind. Across the ruin-strewn street, movement caught her eye. A squad of enemy soldiers emerged from the mist of dust and smoke, their silhouettes crisp against the fading light. They were disciplined, tight formation, their steps slow but deliberate. They weren't just searching, they were hunting. And she was the prey. Marin adjusted her rifle, aligning the scope against the topmost corner of the ruined building that gave her cover. Her finger caressed the trigger, not tense but patient. She had become something different out here, less a soldier, more a phantom. She would not waste her breath on fear. She had only precision left. The first soldier leaned out from behind rubble, scanning the street with his rifle raised. His armor reflected the last dying gleams of the sun, and for a brief second, Marin saw herself mirrored in the cold visor. Without hesitation she squeezed the trigger. The crack tore the silence and the visor shattered crimson. The soldier dropped, lifeless before his knees touched the ground. The others scattered, ducking behind cover, shouting commands she couldn't fully hear over the ringing in her ears. She adjusted position, sliding onto her stomach, crawling through rubble to a new vantage point before their return fire shredded her last location. Bullets clattered against the wall she'd just abandoned, each impact a brutal reminder that one mistake meant the end. The next moment stretched thin and long. Gunfire barked from 3 different directions, and the air around her filled with stone chips and powder. Marin stayed low, moving like water, refusing to be pinned in one place. Every muscle in her body burned, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had been at this game all day, pinned down, surviving by wit, instinct, and stubborn will. These men were just another wave against the shore, loud, forceful, but doomed to break. She rolled behind a collapsed column and steadied her rifle once more. Another silhouette darted from cover, sprinting across open ground in a desperate attempt to flank her. He didn't make it halfway before Marin's bullet ripped through his chest, sending him sprawling to the dust. Another gone. 4 left, maybe 5, she wasn't sure if reinforcements were slipping in through the smoke. A sudden burst of grenades rocked the street, the explosions close enough to lift her from the ground and slam her shoulder against the wall. Pain seared through her side, her ears ringing louder now, but she gritted her teeth and forced her body to obey. She checked her rifle again, 4 rounds left. No time for hesitation. She had to bleed them, force them to think she was everywhere at once. She took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to no one in particular, then broke from cover. Dust billowed as she sprinted to the next ruin, firing 2 shots mid-movement. One bullet clipped an enemy's leg, sending him tumbling with a scream. The other buried into another's throat, silencing him instantly. They panicked then, firing wildly, their formation shattered. For the first time all day Marin felt the tide shift, ever so slightly. She had become the storm in their midst. Sliding behind a slab of concrete, she reloaded with shaking hands. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she realized she was bleeding from her temple, the result of shrapnel she hadn't felt until now. She ignored it, tightening her grip. Survival didn't care about pain. The street went quiet again, save for the moans of the wounded soldier crawling in the dirt. She steadied her rifle on the edge of the rubble, scanning for movement. And then, there it was. A flicker of shadow on the rooftops. She saw the glint of a scope, a heartbeat before the shot cracked. The bullet shattered the stone inches from her head. A sniper. They'd finally sent someone who knew her game. Her chest tightened. She had 3 bullets left. 3 chances to even the odds. Slowly, deliberately, she ducked lower, dragging herself along the ground until she reached a broken stairwell that led upward into the skeletal remains of a building. She needed height, needed angles, needed to outthink the marksman above. The climb was agony. Each step jarred her injuries, each inhale scraped her lungs raw with dust. But she moved, relentless, until she emerged onto a floor open to the sky. There she crouched low, scanning rooftops through the lengthening shadows. Dusk had nearly swallowed the street now, leaving shapes blurred and shifting. She waited, breathing slow, letting her heartbeat fall in rhythm with the silence. The sniper fired again, this time aiming at the broken wall she had just crawled past below. He thought she was still down there. That was his mistake. Marin exhaled, found the gleam of his scope in her own sights and fired. The shot cracked across the ruins and the shadow collapsed. Her lips parted, not in triumph but in relief that tasted almost bitter. 2 bullets left. The wounded soldier below continued to crawl, dragging himself closer to his squad's lines. Marin didn't finish him, he was no longer the threat. She was saving those bullets for what was coming next, because instinct told her this wasn't over. Reinforcements would come. The enemy had poured men at her all day, wave after wave, unwilling to leave one woman alive to mock their advance. And now, as night settled and the battlefield grew colder, she realized she was still alive, still unbroken, still holding them here. Pinned down since dawn. Still standing at dusk. And still not finished, the battlefield seemed to breathe with her, a vast lung of dust and smoke inhaling and exhaling in long heavy sighs. Marin crouched on the cracked floor of the ruined building, rifle still warm against her shoulder, 2 bullets left in her chamber, her pulse pounding as though it could echo across the night. The silence stretched unnaturally wide, the kind of silence that didn't promise peace but warned of something gathering, something bigger than what she had endured all day. She knew it instinctively, this wasn't finished. The enemy had been testing her, bleeding themselves against her resolve, but they hadn't accepted her survival. Not yet. The light of dusk had faded almost completely now. What little glow remained was a smear of bruised red at the edge of the sky, a dying ember that made the world feel like it hung between 2 breaths, one of survival, one of annihilation. In that fading light, she moved carefully along the floor, keeping low, scanning the streets below for shapes, for glints of metal, for the subtle rhythm of boots against broken earth. Nothing stirred but shadows. Then she heard it. A distant rumble. Not artillery, no, this sound was closer, heavier, mechanical. The grinding growl of engines moving through rubble. She pressed herself against the edge of the broken wall, peering into the gloom. Her heart sank as her eyes caught the silhouette of armored transports crawling down the main street, their headlights slashing beams of pale light across the ruins. Infantry spilled from the backs of the machines, dozens of them, their rifles gleaming. Reinforcements. The enemy had sent a tide to wash her from the city's bones. For a brief second, she felt the weight of hopelessness press down on her shoulders. 2 bullets against dozens of rifles, armored steel, and the kind of numbers that could drown even the strongest will. She pressed her forehead against the rifle stock, eyes shut. She had already survived the impossible once today, had already claimed moments where death should have owned her. But even stubbornness had its limits. And yet, she thought of Koval's hand gripping hers, his broken voice demanding she keep moving, keep fighting. She thought of the sniper boy with the trembling hands, his photo falling into the dirt. She thought of the squad that had scattered that morning, maybe dead, maybe alive somewhere beyond this carnage. And she thought of herself, standing alone not because she wanted to, but because the war had left her no choice. She drew in a slow breath. 2 bullets. That was all. But maybe she didn't need more. Maybe survival wasn't the point anymore. Maybe what mattered was leaving the enemy with scars, making them remember her, making them feel the weight of every inch of ground they had taken. One soldier could not stop an army, but one soldier could make an army bleed. Her decision was made in silence. She moved quickly, sliding down from the shattered floor and into the stairwell, her boots crunching softly against debris. The transport engines grew louder, their guttural roars vibrating through the stone. Shadows stretched long across the rubble as the soldiers fanned out, their voices sharp, commanding, searching. Marin adjusted her grip on the rifle and pressed herself against the wall. Every muscle in her body felt tight, trembling, but her mind had settled into the same razor-edge calm she had carried all day. She waited until the first group passed near, their steps quick, rifles raised. Her finger tightened on the trigger, her breath steady. She fired once and the first man dropped. Without hesitation she turned, fired again, and another fell into the dust. Her rifle was empty. The soldiers shouted, rifles cracking, bullets tearing the air around her. She flung the weapon aside and sprinted into the ruins, her body fueled by pure instinct. She dove behind a collapsed arch as bullets shredded the stones around her, dust choking her lungs. She pulled her sidearm, the last 2 rounds in its chamber heavy with finality. The transport engines roared closer, their spotlights cutting through the dark, illuminating her cover like the stage of an execution. Marin pressed her back against the wall, chest heaving, sidearm clutched tight. 2 bullets left and no clear path. The voices drew nearer, the crunch of boots growing louder. They would surround her in seconds. She thought of the bullet she had promised herself, the one she had reserved as her final act if capture became inevitable. But as the enemy closed in, she realized something had changed. This wasn't about surrendering and it wasn't about mercy. If she was to fall, it would not be quietly. The spotlight swept past her hiding place and she moved. Rising from the rubble, she fired once, the bullet tearing through the chest of the nearest soldier. Shouts erupted, the squad turning toward her, muzzles flashing in the dark. She lifted the pistol again, aimed not at flesh but at the transport ahead, its open hatch glowing with light. The final bullet cracked across the night, striking sparks from exposed wiring near the engine. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. Fire burst from the hatch, engulfing 2 soldiers in flame, the transport lurching sideways, its engine shrieking as it tore itself apart. The shockwave threw her backward into the rubble, dust and fire raining around her. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, and her body screamed in pain. But she smiled, weak, bloodied but real. She had made them bleed. She had left her mark. As she lay against the broken stones, the battlefield spinning around her, she could hear the enemy shouting, their voices panicked, their formation broken. She knew they would find her in moments, rifles leveled, safety catches off. She had no bullets left, no strength left. But in her chest there was no fear anymore. Only defiance. The stars above burned cold and distant, watching as her eyes drifted toward them. She whispered, barely audible, a promise to herself, to Koval, to the boy sniper, to all who had fallen, "I didn't stop." And when the soldiers came, surrounding the ruins, shouting commands she couldn't hear anymore, she lifted her chin and met them with eyes that held no surrender. The world around her collapsed into fragments of sound and shadow. Marin's body lay half buried under stone and ash, her breath ragged, her vision blurred with blood and smoke. She could hear them coming, the stomp of boots, the harsh commands barked in a language that rolled like thunder. Shapes moved through the haze, rifles raised, armored plates glinting under the glow of burning transports. Her pistol lay empty at her side, her rifle abandoned in the dust. Yet even as soldiers closed in, weapons trained at her chest, she forced herself to sit up, to lift her chin. She had nothing left but defiance, and that would have to be enough. One of them shouted, motioning for her to drop any remaining weapons. She simply stared back, her lips cracked, her face streaked with dirt and blood. The soldier's visor hid his eyes, but his hesitation was clear. She should have been dead. By all rights she should have been a corpse beneath rubble hours ago. Yet here she was, upright, gaze unbroken, as if carved from the same stone she had bled into all day. That image unsettled them. She could see it in the way they shifted, uncertain whether to finish her or drag her away. Rough hands yanked her up, and pain shot through her body like fire. Her legs nearly gave out, but she forced herself to stand, refusing to let them see weakness. They bound her wrists with coarse cord, shoved her forward through the ruins. The street was alive with chaos. Burning wrecks cast orange light across broken walls, wounded men cried out for medics, and the acrid scent of smoke mingled with the sharp tang of spilled fuel. In the midst of it all, the soldiers pushed her like spoils of war, as though capturing her was the only victory they had earned that day. They led her toward the remains of a plaza, where an officer stood beside the smoldering transport. His uniform was unmarred, his boots polished even in the ash, his eyes cold behind his visor. He studied her with an unsettling patience, as if weighing the worth of the battered figure before him. Then he removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face, sharp and merciless. He spoke, his tone calm, almost curious, though she could not understand his words. But his gesture was clear enough. This was the one who had pinned them down all day. This was the ghost who had turned their advance into a blood-soaked crawl. Marin swayed on her feet but said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any insult. The officer's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. He barked orders and 2 soldiers forced her to her knees. She felt the rough stones bite into her skin, but she kept her eyes level, her spine straight. The officer crouched before her, tilting his head as though studying an animal caught in a snare. Then, without warning, he drove his fist across her jaw. Pain exploded through her skull and she toppled sideways, blood spilling from her mouth. The soldiers laughed, but she only spat crimson into the dirt, glaring back with eyes that burned. She wouldn't give them satisfaction. Not after everything. Not after Koval's last words, not after the boy sniper's trembling hands, not after the endless hours she had fought tooth and bone to hold this ground. If this was where her story ended, it would end with her unbroken. The officer rose, his gaze colder now. He barked again and the soldiers dragged her to her feet. They shoved her toward the plaza center, where a ruined statue jutted into the sky like a broken spear. Chains hung from its base, chains meant for prisoners. She understood then what they intended. They would display her. Humiliate her. Use her as proof that even the fiercest could be dragged into the dirt. Her wrists burned as they clamped her against the stone, the metal biting into her flesh. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, but her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for something, anything. And there, above the burning rooftops, she saw the stars emerging, faint but steady. Cold and endless, they blinked down as if to remind her that the world was larger than this war, larger than this moment. That thought steadied her. The officer stepped forward again, pulling a knife from his belt. He pressed the blade under her chin, forcing her to lift her head. His eyes searched hers, perhaps expecting to see fear at last. But he found none. Only the reflection of flames and starlight, and the hard, unyielding steel of her will. For a moment he froze, unsettled. She felt the knife tremble slightly before he lowered it. He barked fresh orders and the soldiers pulled back, forming a perimeter around the plaza. Marin was left chained to the statue, the officer's shadow stretching long across the ground as he walked away. They weren't going to kill her. Not yet. No, this was worse. They intended to keep her alive, to drag her further into the darkness of their camps, to parade her as proof of conquest. She sagged against the chains, her body screaming in pain, but her spirit refused to bow. Her mind drifted back through the long hours of the day, each memory burning vivid. The first shot she fired at dawn, the desperate crawl through rubble, the explosion that had lit the street in fire. She had lived all of it, endured all of it. They might chain her body, but they could not erase what she had carved into this battlefield. She had become legend in a single day, whether she lived to tell it or not. Night deepened, swallowing the ruins in shadow. The soldiers settled into their positions, fires crackling, voices muttering in low tones. Marin closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull at her, though her grip on consciousness never fully slipped. Somewhere out there, past the broken skyline, she imagined her comrades still fighting, still holding on. She imagined them hearing whispers tomorrow of a lone soldier who held an army at bay, and she prayed those whispers would carry hope. When her eyes opened again, the stars were brighter, sharper. She breathed deep, ignoring the pain, and whispered to herself, so softly that only the night could hear, "I am not finished." And though she was bound, bleeding, and surrounded, she believed it. The night clung to the ruins like a shroud. Smoke from burning transports still coiled upward, black threads winding into the sky where the stars burned sharp and indifferent. Marin's wrists throbbed against the chains binding her to the broken statue, each breath shallow, her body aching with bruises and blood. The enemy had left her alive, strung up as their trophy, their proof of dominance. Around the plaza, soldiers dozed in shifts, rifles slung across their laps, while others murmured quietly near fires, their voices carrying the bitter edge of men too exhausted to celebrate a hollow victory. She shifted, the chains rattling softly, and her gaze roamed the square. She memorized the positions of each soldier, the arcs of firelight, the gaps in the perimeter. It was hopeless detail, but her mind refused to surrender. Counting enemies, scanning for weapons, listening for patrols, it kept her sane. Her body wanted to collapse, but her mind sharpened with each breath. She reminded herself over and over, "I'm not finished." The hours dragged. A cold wind slipped through the plaza, tugging at her hair, chilling sweat against her skin. Her jaw ached where the officer's fist had struck, her ribs protested every breath, but pain was a companion she had grown used to. It anchored her, reminded her she was still alive. And as long as she lived, even bound, she could still defy them. Then came a sound she hadn't expected. A faint crack in the distance, sharp and clean. Not artillery. Not rifle fire from the plaza. It was too far, too deliberate. A sniper's shot. One of the enemy soldiers near the perimeter collapsed instantly, a neat hole through his visor. His comrades shouted, scrambling to cover, searching the rooftops. Another crack split the night and a second soldier fell. Panic rippled through the ranks, the order of the plaza unraveling. Marin's heart jolted. The sound was unmistakable, the precise rhythm of a trained marksman. And in that instant she thought of him, the boy sniper with trembling hands, the one she had guided through fear, who had held the photo of his sister. Could it be? Had he survived? Had he found her? She didn't know, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was not alone. Someone out there was striking for her, turning the tide again. The officer stormed into the plaza, barking furious orders. Soldiers scrambled, rifles aimed blindly into the dark. But the sniper was patient, methodical. Each shot found its mark, and each soldier that fell only deepened the chaos. Marin tugged at the chains, testing their strength. They held fast, but desperation lent her strength she didn't know she had. Her wrists bled as she twisted, metal scraping flesh, but she didn't stop. If she could break free now in the chaos, she could vanish into the night. The officer noticed her struggling and strode toward her, fury burning in his scarred face. He drew his sidearm, pressing the cold barrel under her chin. His voice cut like steel, promising her death if she moved again. But his threat was too late. Another shot cracked, and the officer staggered, blood spraying as he collapsed at her feet. The square erupted in shouts and gunfire. Soldiers fired wildly into the dark, their formation breaking apart completely. Marin gritted her teeth and pulled harder at the chains, ignoring the fire in her wrists. And then, with a final heave, the rusted bolt securing them to the statue snapped loose. She stumbled forward, free. Her hands were raw and bleeding, but freedom surged through her veins like fire. She grabbed the fallen officer's sidearm, its weight familiar and comforting in her grip. She ducked low, weaving through chaos, each step fueled by instinct. Bullets snapped past her, sparks dancing from stone, but she moved like she had all day, swift, precise, unwilling to stop. At the edge of the plaza, she dropped behind cover, breathing hard. Her eyes searched the rooftops, but she saw nothing, only shadows, smoke, and the occasional flash of distant muzzle fire. Whoever the sniper was, he remained unseen, but his presence was enough. He was the unseen hand that tipped fate back in her direction. Soldiers shouted frantically, pulling back from the plaza as bodies fell one by one. Fear spread faster than command could contain. Within minutes, the once disciplined force had fractured into retreat, dragging wounded and abandoning positions. The transport fire still burned, lighting the ruins with an eerie glow, but the army that had seemed invincible hours ago was scattering like ash on the wind. Marin rose from her cover, sidearm clutched tight, and stepped into the square. The enemy was falling back, their voices fading into the night. Around her, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of flames. She stood alone again, but not defeated. Never defeated. Her eyes lifted to the rooftops one last time. The sniper was gone, no sign, no signal. But she knew, deep in her chest, that someone had answered her defiance, someone had carried her fight when she could not. Whether it was the boy or another ally, it didn't matter. What mattered was that the war had heard her. She lowered the pistol, the weight heavy but steady in her hand. She was still alive. Against all odds, through chains, fire, and armies she had endured. And now, standing amidst ruins she had defended with every breath, she felt something she hadn't all day, possibility. The horizon was still dark, but faint light brushed against the edge of the sky, the first whisper of dawn. She watched it rise, slow and unyielding, as if the world itself had chosen to echo her defiance. Marin took a long breath, tasting smoke and ash, but also air that was hers, unchained, unbroken. She whispered into the silence, her voice hoarse but certain, "I am not finished. Not today. Not ever." And with that, she turned toward the shadows of the city, pistol in hand, body battered but unyielding, and walked into whatever awaited her. The end.